Welcome. I'm Jessica Tietjen, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. All right, I want to welcome back our Evolving to Exceptional listeners to this week's episode. This week, we have Michelle Foster with us. She is a guest speaker to talk about communications, and she's really a communications guru. We're going to talk about specifically executive communications and CEOs and why that's so hard, and also why it is just so very important. So Michelle is the owner and executive communications consultant at Small Potatoes and really specializes in this space. So Michelle, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what Small Potatoes is, what it is that you do, what is a communications consultant, and kind of what you focus on and why you're passionate about it.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Communications is such an important part of every organization. It's how strategies, it's how things get done throughout the organization. And Small Potatoes Communications, we're really focused on helping executives and other senior leaders communicate their strategies throughout to internal and external audiences so that they can actually achieve what they set out to achieve and really be successful. I started out in in-house communications, going anywhere from I started out in marketing and then human resources, investor relations, and all the things. And what I really experienced was so many different levels of leaders and so many different opportunities to communicate different things to essential people throughout your company. And I brought that over to the agency side, and I'm really able to work directly with the C-suite leaders and other executives to help them make it happen, right? Communicate their vision, make sure that everything is achievable and that everybody's rowing in the same direction. So that's what I really love to do.
I love it. And as a fellow communicator, I think we talk a lot about communications, but it really is central to everything we do. You cannot get away without doing it effectively. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what is some of kind of the challenges that executives might be experiencing or might be dealing with that would warrant or have them seek out your kind of support, the kind of help that you provide in terms of communications.
If you think about when you ascend to the C-suite, you have so much responsibility. You have multiple direct reports. In larger organizations. Your hierarchy could go down 6, 7 levels, right? And you're up here holding so much. And what I've seen a lot from executives is they have a tendency to keep getting more and more added to your plate. So if you're really good, your benefit is that you get to do more jobs than the one that you were originally given. And that's a lot of high performing executives. That's exhausting. It's exhausting to be in this situation where you are so passionate about what your company set to achieve and you really want it. You really work hard for it. And then the need is identified and you're successful in one area, which means you need to be successful in 10 others. And that's tough. That's really tough. And having a partner that can listen to what's going on with you and to help you process everything and then come up with a plan, an action plan to get things done and to have things communicated really thoughtfully about all of the audiences, board of directors, your employees, your shareholders, your media, all of the other stakeholders, really having someone that can come in and help you. Just the thing that I really love to do is just listen to people talk, because then I'm sorting everything in my mind about this. I'm hearing everything that's important and I'm prioritizing it, and to have someone reflect that back to you so that you can say yes, no, yes, and then be able to thoughtfully and strategically communicate those things out so that they can be achieved. That's something I absolutely love to do. Making it really easy for executives. That's the thing, is you got to make it easy, right? Don't make it harder on people. You have to make it easier on people. And just being able to show up and just let it all out, right? Blah, here's all the things, right? And then to have somebody take it and organize it and make it make sense. That's the value, right? That's the thing that's going to make your life easier. And then for me, one of my values is humor and another one is authenticity. So I'm always coming to situations with levity and just trying to make things more fun. My goal is to be um, the most fun meeting that you have in a day. If not the second, bare minimum, the second most fun meeting that you would have in a day. And yeah, that's what I love that.
So it's interesting to me because I relate to what you're talking about a lot because I was one of those executives who just kept getting more and more things to do when I was in my last organization. Started with legal, then I took talent management HR, then I took IT and customer service and project coordination and a bunch of operations functions. And so I think that's a common story, right? If you're a strong performer, a strong deliverer, then they just give you more to do. They also give you more people to work for you. So not only are you having to accomplish more, but you're having to also manage those resources in pursuit of accomplishing that.
Yep.
What do you see tend to maybe get in the way of leaders or executives being able to do this well? Besides just being busy, are there certain things that come up for a leader that makes it difficult for them to craft the message or to know how to communicate? Or what is it that maybe comes up or makes it harder to do it well?
The first thing that popped in my mind was almost the willingness to admit that you need help. When you're a high performer and you are naturally inclined to, I forgive me for saying this, I don't know if this is PG or whatever, but kick ass and take names, right? That's who you are as a person. And when you get to the point where you have so much and you're spread so thin, it's not a reflection on you to ask for help. It doesn't reflect poorly on you to ask for help. It actually shows a sign of strength, shows a sign of understanding that you need to put things in place to be successful, and getting over that gap, especially when you think about new people leaders or people leaders that are high performers that get promoted into these executive roles. You have, when you get promoted, hopefully you move up the ladder and then you get more resources, right? You have more resources to be able to deploy so that you can achieve all of these different things. And like you said, you have multiple functions, right? Multiple relatively unrelated functions, IT and HR. We're all people, but those functions and
Right.
what they're meant to achieve are different. That's really strategically deploying your resources is something that can get in the way, and being willing to ask for help. I think that another thing that can get in the way is ego. From a communication perspective, there's so much nuance in what it is and how to do it well that I think people think that if they're articulate, they just got it, right? I can string a sentence together so I know how to communicate. And there's so many more layers to it to actually get it so that it's understood by your audiences and people are engaged and motivated to help you succeed. There's just a lot of layers, and understanding the value and the nuance of what communication is and letting go of the ego that it's okay that you're not perfect at it, right? That's why they're experts in fields, right? That's why you have an HR team. That's why you have an IT team. It's because you're not meant to be amazing at everything. I think what you're meant to be is really smart and strategic and thoughtful about what you're trying to achieve within your particular function or within your particular function associated with the high level
Mhm.
overarching strategy of your company. And so that's another thing that could potentially get in the way.
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind when you talk about that. One is I've definitely seen where two people have a conversation, they both come talk to me about that conversation, and they both have completely different interpretations of that conversation, of what was communicated and what they heard and experienced. And one of the things that we talk about from a neuroscience and neuroperformance perspective is that we often talk about that there's neural networks in our head brain, but there's also neural networks in our heart and in our guts. And when we're communicating, we're receiving through all of those different lenses. And you may have communicated factually the information to the head brain, the analytical side. But if you aren't also taking into consideration the emotional piece, And then also like identity and safety and action kind of piece, which is our gut brain, is that self-preservation and identity. Then you've got a lot of different kind of moving parts there that have to line up to create understanding. And what gets in the way in general, when it comes to performance and people, is that we each have our own lens. We each have our own like life experience in which we're like viewing the world, like you talked about, our own ego, our own limiting beliefs and fears, and how we perceive ourselves and other people, and all of those things. And then that clouds out or can how we're seeing things. I know I mentioned this to you before we got on, but one of the things we know about leaders is the higher you get in terms of leadership, the more your brain actually changes. And it makes it more difficult to have or experience empathy for people or see the perspective of people from different places within the organization or from lower levels within the organization. And that it takes actual intentional work by leaders to prevent that or to mitigate against that impact. And having worked with other executives and even been one myself, I'm willing to admit that I've experienced that you get in your vision focus, like you talked about, kind of mentality, and it's hard to understand or to even have the space to consider what someone else might be experiencing, feeling, how they might be interpreting what you're communicating or the way in which you're communicating it. And so it becomes easy to just dismiss as they're dramatic or they are smart enough or they don't, whatever. We come up with a lot of excuses rather than recognize that maybe there's something that I'm not doing enough as an executive or that I'm not recognizing.
It's a lot to hold, right? If you're an executive and let's say you've got 100-person team, right? You cascade. It's a lot to hold. And it's not feasible for any one person to be able to manage a group of 100 people individually in that way, right? So it's a lot to hold. So if you stop and think that I am responsible for the individual perception of what I have to communicate, that's overwhelming, right? You can't, and I wouldn't even suggest that you do this. You don't take ownership over the individual. However, there's so many different things that you can think about and do to ensure that you are reaching as many people in as many places with as many head, heart, gut as possible. And that's really focusing on what is happening, why is it happening, and what does this look like for you? And if you keep it at those levels, the what does it look like for you can be more manageable because it's never going to be you literally individually you unless you're doing one-on-one. But if it's you, that you as a lower level people leader, you as an individual contributor, you as somebody on a manufacturing floor, for example, if you think about those layers, you can get to more people as long as you're coming at it with, again, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How does it impact you from an authentic place and a place that's tied to everything, your business strategy, your individual, your structure, your functional strategy and stuff like that. That's how you make that more manageable.
I love that line. I always say head, heart, gut. That's what we like center our stuff around. And I always say, whenever you're communicating, and this is more for one-on-ones and in that space, but what do I need them to think or know? What do I want them to feel or relate to or think is important or understand to be important? What do I want them to do? What do I want them to take action on?
Perfect.
And I think it's interesting how, at least in my past, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this, there's varying perspectives on how important communication is. And yeah, and whether it's better for it to be simple or whether it's better to over communicate or under communicate. And I'm curious a little bit. I know you're a communications, expert, but if you've encountered this and what your thoughts are on it.
It just depends. I think the most critical thing that you can do to be successful in your communication is to be authentic. So people are going to be more open to what is being said to them if they feel like it's coming from a real place. If they feel like it's coming from someone that believes in what they're saying. So that's why when I work with leaders, I get so pumped when I hear them talk so passionately. I work with a CEO of a consumer brand, and when she talks so fluently and so knowledgeably about her brand and her company and what's going on and what her priorities are and how they're going to be successful, and to see that so naturally come from her, I am just like, say more things. And I think that's the thing that everybody is going to respond to. So you have educational content, there's stuff you got to know. You got to tie it to the why. You got to tie it to why this matters. You can make it personal. Why does this matter to me? I'm a leader of a 100-person team. This is passionate. I'm passionate about this because it's really going to help us grow in this particular area. Because and I think that this particular area is going to be really fun for everybody, and they're really going to have this amazing experience, and we're going to be able to grow our team. Whatever the thing is, tying it to yourself, tying it to the meaning, tying it to the strategy of the overarching company, and then tying it to, again, how they could how they impact this and how they make this important. That's the stuff that can inspire people. We're going to have to educate. We're going to have to sometimes give people crappy news. We're going to have to make changes. If we do that from a place of realness and authenticity, all of that other stuff is going to be way more palatable for the audiences, any of the audiences, boards, investors, anybody.
So I'm curious. I love this idea, I think you're dead on in terms of the impact of authentic communication and how that's received. That has a lot to do with the person, like you said, and
Yep.
their willingness to show up and communicate in that way. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I think there are many leaders that have a lot of walls up in order to get to where they have, out of deep rooted fears or patterns that they have from their own past, that I think can make really showing up authentically challenging. And and I don't know that you can, I'm trying to think through the best way to say this. I don't know that you can fake it, right? I don't know that you can really, it's a sense that you get from that person's actual neural networks in their body lining up and them coming from a genuine space, that it's something that you feel and you recognize. It's not contrived. And so I'm just curious, is that something leaders maybe struggle with? How do you help them with that? What goes into dealing with that?
Yeah. So authenticity is one of my personal values. It's one of the things that is so core to me being able to exist in this world and be happy. But I have done years of work,
Yeah.
years of work with my business coach, executive coach, years. Okay. And it's something that is my number one priority. So yes, it is absolutely difficult to be able to do that. I think so from a personal perspective, right, I was conditioned throughout points in my career that Michelle Foster was too much, be less. I like what you did here, but just less of you is how this messaging that I got throughout stages of my career. And it took a long time to be able to push that aside and say, okay, that's their opinion. That's the experience they want. That has nothing to do with me. The me that I'm bringing to the world is valuable. The me that I am, I belong, period. Just because this is what I do. And it's work to get there. From a leader perspective, number one recommendation is to find somebody that can help you work through things and process things the same way that I did, so that you can show up authentically and you can show up and separate people's opinions from who you are as a person, and really build the foundation of belief that you are enough. How you show up is enough. It's work, y'all. And so what I can do for executives, and what I hope happens, is that if they see me showing up authentically, it's a model. Like with younger folks or with executives or with peers or whatever, it's if I can model the behavior of showing up and being me and being silly and saying silly things, all those things add up to me being awesome. And all of your things add up to you being awesome. And so that's what I want to do. I want to model that behavior. And I think that another thing that I really like to do, and it just comes naturally to me because it's just who I am as a person, but I truly care about the people that I work with and I want them to be successful. Yes. But I want them to be happy. We spend a lot of time at work, and if you're unhappy most of the time, you're going to spend the majority of your life unhappy. So when I come to a meeting and I'm asking questions like, how are you doing? Or trying to reflect things back to them that they're doing really well. I do that on purpose. One, because I see it and I want them to feel it. I want them to feel good about what they've done and what they're accomplishing and who they are and how they're showing up for people. But I can only model it. You can't make someone drop the weight. So you have to work on it.
I think something you brought up here is really important in that you've worked with this business to coach. And I love your vulnerability in sharing how you've worked on that for years. Because I've had coaches, I coach, but I also have coaches that were human beings and becomings is what I like to say. And so we're always working on ourselves in those ways. And I think executives, in my personal opinion, I don't know that a CEO should ever be without an external coach resource because they're in that position. There's no one within your organization that is going to be fully fully honest with you all of the time because of the relationship and the nature of things. And so to have that external guidance, I think is so key. So I think it's admirable, and I think it's important for CEOs and senior leaders to recognize that part of your being a really successful leader is going to be a willingness to get that external support for your own growth and evolution and development. The other thing that kind of came to mind while you were talking was the difference between you talked about the ego, and I often like to say there's like the ego self and then there's the actual core self, like who you really are at your core. And we develop these kind of egos in response to challenges in our lives to keep us safe, to protect us. So if we got hurt in some way, or we realized we didn't get promoted when we did something a certain way, we create our patterns, our neural pathways create these ways of being to try to support us or try to help us. And I think sometimes people get confused between their authentic ego, showing up as their authentic ego state, and really being like their authentic core true self. And really recognizing when they're in kind of those two different states. And so I think it's interesting to think about, as you shared in your journey and I share often in mine, the work that goes into making that shift so that you can communicate from that space.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of things that you have to strip away and be able to look at more objectively that you've experienced in the past, or that the stories that you have in your head, being able to recognize those as stories and to be able to ground yourself in who you are and who you want to be and work toward that always. You mentioned it, like it's a vulnerable space to be in. But it's so valuable. It's so valuable for leaders. And we go back to the communication aspect of it, and you're not going to lose. Actually, you're going to gain. You're not going to lose anything. You're not going to lose the thing that makes you capable of coming up with brilliant strategies, right? You're not going to lose the capability of seeing the possibilities for your organization. You're not going to lose anything. What you're going to gain is relationships and alignment with people around you to help you actually get there, right? To help you actually achieve this thing that you're passionate about, and having more people. that's what you pick up by sharing your vulnerabilities, sharing your concerns, sharing your excitement and your passion around these things are just going to get people on board with you, and they're just going to help you make it happen. And that's what you have to gain by saying, this is who I am and this is how I show up, and being confident in that and not feeling like you have to hide.
I love that. And you know what it makes me think about too is I'm curious, I'm going to have you get into this a little bit, like the written communication versus the verbal communication and how you're supporting, are you the type of work you're doing around that, whether it's helping give them, here's the messaging you want to use, or like actual written communications that they send out and things like that. But one of the things that I think is interesting, especially when we're talking about like visual verbal communication versus written, is to me there's a little bit of an embodiment element. And a lot of leaders will speak from the head. They will speak from, this is what is happening. Even they'll say this is why it's happening, but they're not really embodied. And what I mean by that is they're not connected to their emotion or their empathy and compassion for other people's emotion. And they're not sitting within, what are the fears, or how do I relate to this? And I think it's much easier to communicate from the head. And I often will watch, and when you see certain leaders, you can watch this in terms of like different political leaders right now who are speaking. If you watch different politicians, and I'm not talking at the top, but like any level of a political candidate, the difference in when they're speaking from just their head versus from their full body, from, this is what I believe and it's who I am, and this is how I feel, and this is how I know you feel, and connecting to that in a really authentic way because they're in their body. And I think a lot of leaders don't recognize, or maybe not always aware of, those different like physical energy states that you can be in when you're communicating, and how that has an impact on your audience and your listeners. And as a speaker, I know, you know, when I'm really in my body and speaking authentically is when people are like, wow, I could feel your energy, and I could feel how true you were, and it impacts them differently than if I'm nervous and scared and I'm trying to say the words right, or I'm trying to be a certain way,
Yeah.
especially when I was first speaking on stages, right? And it doesn't feel the same. It feels like less comfortable, right? And I'm not sure that leaders always realize that. I don't know. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that, and then like how do you do that both in helping them do it verbally and in person, but then also in writing?
Yeah. Writing is different than, it's just a different animal. I think that you can think about your language, you think about how it comes across, but it, unless you're really well known, and a lot of executives aren't that well known because they don't have a lot of opportunities to be in front of people, like really in front of people, showing their authentic selves. It's harder for that to come through, right? It's harder to feel that. What I do a lot of, I do a lot of presentation support. So a lot of board meetings, town hall meetings for employees, investor meetings, that sort of thing, where you do have an opportunity to deliver the information from yourself. And it's an interesting balance between going there and being prepared and knowing your stuff and speaking authentically. I think one of the things that you notice is if the person is really passionate and has the stuff in their brain, like it's what they live every day, you're going to have a quicker path to being able to get to that authenticity feeling, right?
Yeah.
The people are experiencing and they feeling from you because it's so much in you.
Yeah.
And a lot of times presentations, either you don't have time to get them in you or you've got other things going on. But from a communication perspective, then that's the conversation, is what's top of mind for you. Because if we can start at the level where we're speaking about the things that the executives are thinking about, concerned about, excited about, ready to get after, we're gonna get you closer to being able to get into that emotional sort of like connected speech. And when I go through board, for example, like a board meeting, thinking about what are we going to communicate with the board, it's okay, what's going on? What are you thinking about? What keeps you up at night? be excited about, and really making sure that those things are reflected along with then the standard work of the things that you have to communicate every quarter, right? Because there are expectations when you do town halls and board meetings that you're communicating consistently, things like that. So it's really balancing the what do we have to communicate with what do I want to communicate? And hopefully all of that will come together in a really, really comfortable and confident space.
I love that. And I think uh, my background is super interesting because I worked for a CEO who really valued authentic communication for a long time and who showed up in that space, whether it was written or verbal. And you could tell it was authentic because it wasn't perfect, right? Like his communications would have typos or the sentences might not be right, but like nobody cared because it was really from him. And then I worked for a CEO who was the opposite, who felt communication should be really short, simple, not, yeah, like fact based, and really struggled, I think, to connect with people in general. And the contrast was so significant. I don't think though many, I could be wrong. I don't know. This is my limited experience though, that many would necessarily think about going outside to bring someone to help them do their communications, to hire someone in. Big organizations have whole communications teams.
Right.
Small organizations kind of wing it. I'm curious what you would say to maybe like the smaller business owner who doesn't have a communications team, or about why they should really consider this. Like why
Mm.
like this would really help them save time, get better results. What is that impact for them that would say, you know what, if they're listening right now, like it's worth it for me to look at getting this kind of support.
Yeah, I think that it is interesting to see how organizations prioritize communications from a resourcing perspective, right? So you mentioned some organizations have whole communications teams and some don't. Or that's the first thing that goes when something needs to go and things like that. And if you think about communication as a strategy, you don't reduce resources, you invest in your strategy, right? You invest in the things that are going to make your organization successful, the things that are going to help you grow. And if we can connect the dots between your strategy being successful and communication, that's how we're going to bridge that gap, right? So if you truly want a deeper understanding of your strategy, of what you're trying to achieve, of how you're going to achieve it, what the initiatives are in your organization, your financial performance, so that people understand all of those things, then we're going to take it a step further. Like, how do you impact that? Like, what is what you're doing? How does what you're doing actually matter to this thing?
Mm-hmm.
That's how the strategy gets done. Because if you have the best strategy in the world and people don't understand it, what's happening here? It's not happening.
Yeah.
So communication is how your strategy gets done.
I love that.
Communication is how you win.
I, I want to emphasize that communication is how your strategy gets done, and how people receive that, integrate that, understand that, and take action on that is going to determine whether your business is successful or not.
Yeah, sorry. I know, add in another resource. Sorry. It is. It is. And honestly, and let's say you are an excellent communicator and you can actually see this, because there are several executives that love communications and prioritize it. It's beautiful to see. Then the next layer of why you would invest in this resource would be to help you get it done, right? To take that burden, not a burden, take that opportunity off of your plate so that you get to have less time really in the weeds with these things, and you get to pass your knowledge and your information on to somebody that can help you get it out there and communicate it. Even if you're great at it, having a support partner is just going to help, right? Having a communicator by your side is just going to help you be successful. It's going to make your life easier, essentially.
I love that. I'm going to add one more thing, and then I'm going to give you a chance to give our listeners like a final words of wisdom as we wrap up this episode. But I want to add one more benefit that I see that you could really bring for people, which is really providing that perspective. Because I think I'm a strong communicator. I like to create communications. I'm a writer, I'm a creator. That's who I am. And I still really like to create critical communications with other people. And I think that there's a lot of value in that conversation with someone else and that support from someone else in crafting a meaningful communication.
Yep.
That when you're stuck in your own neural networks, patterns, pathways, it's never going to be as good as when you work it with others.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the time within your own team and your own organization to do that, if you don't have the time and resources, I think that's where, like you said, bringing someone in who you can have that conversation with, work with, they can go away and do some work on it and get you further faster so that you can do it more consistently and more effectively. That's going to have a huge impact.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I want to give you a chance to give any thoughts.
I actually do. I do love being in a meeting when we're reviewing content or we're reviewing things that need to be communicated. I really do love being able to be like, do you really love?
Yeah.
But do you really? Does anybody really truly need to know this? Right. And help pare some things down and again, make it make sense for multiple audiences.
Absolutely. So any final thoughts or words of wisdom from you for our audience around this topic that you think you want to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we took the turn into authenticity because that is the thing that's going to make your communications it's just going to make them better. It's going to make them more effective, really. And there's so much that leaders can do to work through these things and to be able to show up the table as themselves and really get people and rally people behind them in what they're trying to do. Communication it's critical. You need it. It can absolutely help you. Again, the communicator's role is to help you execute your strategy and to make your life easier. That's what communicators want to do. Communicators are strategic business partners, and it's worth it. It's worth it.
I love that. And I think communication is absolutely so critical. And also the self-awareness of your own lens through which you see the world, your own perspective, and your own authenticity in delivering those communications is so critical. And I'm glad we talked about that today too. And for those leaders out there that maybe are questioning, am I communicating authentically? Am I communicating in the ways that are going to leave the impact or create the meaningful results that I want for my teams? I would encourage them to reach out to you and to have that conversation and maybe explore what does that look like for them and how can they deliver that in different ways? And to know that even if there's a struggle there, that any neural pathway, we know that our neural pathways can be rewired, that we can recreate ourselves to be more authentic, to be better communicators, to be more connected with our head, our heart, and our different gut brains and communicate in a way that's really embodied. And when we do, it's going to leave a much bigger impact for our people. I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to today's episode. And as always, I just want to remind you to always keep evolving, keep growing, keep looking for those opportunities to grow and evolve yourself so that you can live your best life, an exceptional life. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll be back again next week with another episode.